Today the member already belongs to 2 workspaces, so switching should not require another invitation. The first request lists only that caller's active memberships and marks the current selection. The client then sends one target identifier to the selection endpoint. The server proves the matching user and workspace membership is active before changing anything. A real switch updates the server-owned selector and rotates both identity stamps. The token that initiated the change immediately becomes stale and receives forbidden. After a fresh sign-in, work item queries run in the newly selected workspace and exclude the previous workspace's item. We will build and test that complete path without adding a table or migration. The mental model is deliberately small. Authentication tells us which user sent the request. The submitted tenant ID tells us which workspace that user wants to select, but it proves nothing. Continuing authority lives in the composite tenant membership record for the authenticated user and candidate tenant, with isActive set to true. Only after that server query succeeds may featurelab_user.tenantID move to the candidate. That user property remains a selector used during fresh claim issuance, it is not permission on its own. The unsafe shortcut is assigning the selector directly from JSON because the caller is authenticated. A signed-in attacker can still submit another workspace's identifier. Identity and tenant authorization remain separate decisions. The GET endpoint derives the standard name identifier and requires exactly one security stamp claim. The store reloads the current user with that identifier and stamp, so a token invalidated by an earlier switch cannot keep enumerating membership state. It then filters tenant memberships by the authenticated user and is active before materializing anything. Rows owned by another account and inactive relationships never enter the response. Results are ordered by tenant ID for deterministic tests, and each record says whether it matches the server-owned selected value. This companion application has no workspace profile table yet, so the API honestly returns technical identifiers instead of inventing names. A current unscoped identity with no active memberships receives an empty array. These routes use ordinary authentication rather than the tenant member policy. That distinction is easy to miss. Removing the currently selected membership clears featurelab_user.tenantID and invalidates its token, but the same account might still hold another active membership. If listing and selection required an already valid selected tenant, that user could never recover by choosing the remaining workspace. The endpoints instead validate the live identity security stamp and query memberships directly from server state. They also avoid iTenant context, because middleware established that context from claims in the incoming token before live authorization. Tenant-protected business features still require TenantMember. Membership selection is the narrow recovery boundary that establishes which valid membership a fresh sign-in will carry. Selection begins by reloading FeatureLab user with both the authenticated user identifier and the token security stamp. A missing match means the identity snapshot is stale and the request receives forbidden. Next, any query requires the exact composite relationship for that user, candidate tenant ID, and active state. A random identifier, an inactive former membership, and a workspace held only by another account all produce the same not found result. The endpoint neither creates nor reactivates authority, and it does not disclose which part of the lookup failed. Extra JSON properties such as a forged user ID, active flag, or version are ignored because the request record exposes only tenant ID. The active stored row makes the decision. A repeated selection is a command that has already reached its desired state. We still validate the active membership, because an inactive selected row must not be treated as success. When the selector already equals a proven active candidate, the store returns already selected without writing. The endpoint maps that to the same 204 response as a successful change, making retries simple for clients. Crucially, the no-op does not rotate security stamp or concurrency stamp. Invalidating a perfectly good token on every repeated click would create needless sign-ins and hide whether state actually changed. An integration test captures both stamps before the request, verifies they remain identical afterward, and proves the existing token still reaches tenant-protected work items. On a real switch, the store updates feature user.tenantID and rotates security stamp plus concurrency stamp before one save changes call. The security stamp invalidates the authenticated snapshot used for this transition. The identity concurrency stamp is already an EF core concurrency token, so competing selector changes cannot silently overwrite each other. One commits and the other observes stale identity or a conflict. Tenant membership record version does not change because selecting a workspace does not create, remove, or reactivate authority. Both memberships remain active at their existing lifecycle versions. No invitation is issued or consumed. This separation keeps auditing meaningful. Membership version describes continuing authority, while the user selector and identity stamps describe the currently issued scope. The transport results make each boundary deliberate without leaking membership details. A malformed GID is rejected by input binding, while GID empty receives bad request. A well-formed target that is absent, inactive, or owned by someone else returns not found. A token whose security stamp no longer matches current identity state receives forbidden. If two valid requests loaded the same user and one wins the optimistic concurrency race, the loser receives conflict with a safe instruction to sign in and retry. Selected and already selected both return no content, and anonymous callers receive unauthorized before handlers run. These results distinguish client repair actions while keeping all unheld workspace probes indistinguishable. No exception text or database detail crosses the boundary. The main integration test provisions 2 active memberships and 1 work item in each workspace. Listing returns both and marks the original selection. The put body includes forged extra user, active and version fields. The narrow request ignores them, while the real active membership permits the target. After 204, the old token receives forbidden from work items and membership listing. Fresh sign-in marks the target and returns only its item. Database assertions prove both memberships remain active at version 1 and no invitation exists. Separate tests reject random, inactive and other user targets without changing stamps, prove the idempotent no-op, block a stale second switch, reject anonymous callers, and race 2 valid choices to prove one selector wins. We added deliberate workspace switching without weakening the tenant boundary. The list endpoint derives the caller and live identity stamp, filters active memberships before materialization and identifies the server-owned selection. The put endpoint treats tenant ID as a candidate, proves the exact active composite row, makes the current choice an idempotent no-op, and rotates both identity stamps only after a real change. Membership versions and invitation states stay untouched. Tests prove cross-workspace isolation, identical rejection for unheld targets, stale token failure, and one winner concurrency. The next slice will create new authority rather than select existing authority, expose invitation issuance behind an owner-only policy, and prove that ordinary membership alone never grants the power to invite another person.